but I'm happy to do so now.
Have you sort of put the finishing touches on your goodbye?
To be honest, I haven't. We've talked about it as a staff in terms of general themes. I plan to make it briefer than most speeches I've given to the legislature in the past, touching on some of the highlights of the last 8 years, but I haven't really got it done in any substantial way yet.
Are you ready now?
I'm going to work with my team and put it all together, and we'll probably do a little wordsmithing before it's all done.
What do you think you're going to miss most about this job?
Interacting with Vermonters, the Bortz family, people like them, folks I've met in every corner of our state who are doing great things, bettering the lives of themselves and their families, of their communities, making a real contribution to Vermont's future. I think that we're doing so well compared to other places in this down economy, not exclusively because of what government does, but because of the entrepreneurship, the ingenuity, the energy of the people of our state who are doing whatever they can to get through some tough times. So I'm inspired by them. I was asked by one of your colleagues, who wasn't here this afternoon, who has inspired me in my life in public service, and I expected that he or she wanted a name of some famous public servant or well-known personality, and I named some individual Vermonters whom I've met over the past couple of years, people who faced adversity and picked themselves up by their bootstraps and really succeeded, and that is what inspires me.
But no, nothing you can say about what you'll do after Middlebury?
All in due time, but I expect to have a relationship with the college beyond the winter term, working on the details. But there may be some other things that materialize as well.
Are you done with the elective office?
I suppose you never say never in this business, John, but I don't anticipate running for office again. I've done it every other November for nearly 4 decades. I think it's time to move on, to spend a little more time with my family and look for other endeavors, so I don't anticipate it.
White House appointments?
I don't think so. It's awfully hot in the summer there.
A tell-all memoir?
Oh, that's an idea. But what happened in Middlebury stays in Middlebury. Yes.
Well, so you've mentioned that you want to write a book. Do you hope to start that like after the winter term at Middlebury? Or?
I'd like to. I have a lot to say.
Like what? I mean,
well, you'll have to wait.
if anyone's going to buy this, they need a little preview. Just one of those little jacket preview type things.
Well, they don't need it today. You'll all be in it.
The governor-elect has decided to give a reprieve to an educational system that did not meet the challenges, targets, going to use the congressional windfall to make up most of the gap. Is that a wise thing to do?
I think I've made my views on education funding pretty clear over the past 8 years and offered some very specific proposals on how to bend the curve. That responsibility now falls to others, and he and his team will have to deal not only with that responsibility, but with a significant general fund shortfall. How it all works without making some tough decisions in the areas of major expenditure, I'm not sure, but I wish them well.
He said, look, if local school boards vote for higher budgets, they're going to suffer the consequences in the form of higher taxes. That's penalty enough. Presumably you don't agree.
I don't think we want to penalize Vermonters at a time when we're trying to grow our economy and make this a more affordable place to live. We've seen the census numbers that came out this week. We had the slowest growth over the past decade since the Great Depression in Vermont. I've talked a lot about the demographics of our state, the declining youth population, the need to build a workforce, and the way we're going to do that is by moderating the property tax burden and making this a more affordable place to live. So we have to keep our eye on the prize and find ways to do that, and the next team will have to take up the cause.
So do you think your speech will talk about that, sort of looking back, but also the challenges ahead, and maybe where you think the state should go vis-a-vis education expenditures?
It's an awkward responsibility, I think, at the end of a tenure. I've looked at some other farewell speeches recently of my predecessors, and many of them do talk about the future and what tasks lay for the next team, but the following day, the new governor will have an opportunity to talk about his plans for the future. So I'm sensitive to not treading too heavily on that area. So maybe some fleeting references, but I don't think I'll dwell on it.
Governor, are you surprised at the size of the budget gap?
112 and growing, I guess. I've heard some other numbers more recently. It's hard to know exactly what it is because our revenues, as you know, are running somewhat ahead of our new targets for this fiscal year, so that will work to mitigate the gap. But clearly it's a lot of money, and this is the third year in a row we've had a 9-figure shortfall that we've had to wrestle with. We found ways to do it in the past, and I'm sure the governor and legislature will in the future. But I don't think it's going to be possible without making some very difficult choices in terms of our spending priorities. So see what they do.
Indication so far, do you think that they are being unrealistic?
I don't know that we've seen a proposal yet, so we'll wait and see. The budget obviously is scheduled for a presentation late next month. He and his team will have some time to work it out.
So how do you spend the next 2 weeks?
Cleaning out, for one thing, deciding which knickknacks to put on the shelves at my office at Middlebury, and getting ready for that transition. I'll be working on my syllabus and reading list and getting ready for my academic responsibilities. Ensuring that we have an orderly transition, and I believe we are having one. As you know, Tim Hayward has had the benefit of several transitions from both perspectives in the past, and is well prepared to work with the new governor's chief of staff and all of his team to dot every I and cross every T and make sure that we don't have any drop stitches during the next couple of weeks. We're working on boxing up the records to go to the state archives at the end of the administration. Some of the folks who've been working on that on my behalf tell me that I've generated more correspondence in 8 years than my immediate predecessor did in 11 and a half. So I've certainly heard from a lot of Vermonters over the time I've been in office and appreciate that content. So those are some of the things we're working on now.
Are those records sealed?
I haven't made that decision yet, but the tradition, as you know, is to seal them for some period. Governor Dean chose 10 years. Governor Snelling and Governor Kuhn chose 6. I expect they'll select some period before some of the records at least are available.
What strikes you as needs to be sealed about?
From my perspective, personally, nothing. But I need to respect the fact that there are a lot of communications from my staff and cabinet that are quite candid about individuals and their skills and personalities and choices that I had to make. And I want to be sure that the tradition of getting unvarnished candor from a governor's team continues, and I think in deference to a number of people who've worked for me, some period of closure is probably appropriate.
When you look back at your years, maybe you can talk about what you think the successes were and maybe the possible failures.
Well, I believe strongly that the people of Vermont will reflect on my tenure in much the way that Bob graciously articulated a few minutes ago. I've done as much as I can to interact with them directly and indirectly through you And I think Bob's comment was based on the fact that most of my counterparts don't have as many press conferences as Vermont governors traditionally do, and certainly don't get around the state as frequently. I recall chatting with a colleague a few years ago who said, well, I get home every night at 5 o'clock to my family, and I was stunned, because I rarely get home at 5 o'clock, unless I have an afternoon event in Middlebury and I need to freshen up before I go off somewhere else. But that's the norm in other places, far less interaction and access, and so I think that's the fundamental memory that many Vermonters will have of my stewardship. I'm proud of many accomplishments. Our fiscal stability in a time of uncertainty around the country. The fact that one national survey rated Vermont the 4th best managed state in the country is something that gives me a great deal of satisfaction. The fact that we were rated the 4th least economically stressed state suggests that we've put in place some policies that have allowed Vermonters to fare relatively well during the deepest recession of our lifetime. The healthcare reform initiatives continue to receive recognition nationally for our foresight, our leadership, the fact that we have the 2nd lowest rate of uninsured residents in the country, and continue to focus on keeping people well out of the hospital and reducing the cost of care. The TER program is something of which I'm very proud. The E-State initiative, while not fully implemented because of the economic downturn, I think has put us on the path to broadband and cell phone infrastructure that's going to be important to our economic future. And the commitment to our transportation system, the largest program in our history this year, nearly $600 million, has allowed us not only to create a lot of jobs in a tough economy, but also to reduce the percentage of our roads and bridges that are rated deficient. So in many different areas, we're moving forward to make this state an even better place to live, and I feel good about those accomplishments.
A couple of years ago, you said that the biggest challenge facing the state was the demographic issues, the gap, the loss of young people. Do you still think that is the biggest challenge we face?
I do. I've often said that we can address everything else. We can decide on what the marginal tax rates are. We can decide on how stringent our regulatory systems are. We can decide on budget priorities. We can decide on the kinds of programs we want to put in place. But if we don't have human capital, if we don't have people to populate a workforce, then employers are going to continue to question the viability of their enterprises in a state like Vermont when they have choices in other parts of the nation and the world. Now, the demographic shift is not unique to Vermont. It's a regional phenomenon in the Northeast United States and Eastern Canada, but we've grown much more slowly than the country as a whole, and need to address that, especially because we're already the 2nd oldest state by median age. I may have mentioned to you that the latest report from the Health Department suggested that the birth rate in Vermont, already the lowest in the nation, declined another 0.1% last year per 100,000 population. I'm sorry, 1/10 of a baby per 100,000 population. So we've got some serious demographic trends to deal with, and if we continue to see an erosion, then I think it's going to bode ill for our economic future.
Do you think you made progress on like the stuff that the Next Generation Commission wants to?
Yes, you recall that my Promise Scholarship initiative was far more extensive than what the legislature ultimately approved, but we've got some money each year for scholarships and for internships and for workforce training programs. Several times recently I've been approached by a student, one at UVM, I've forgotten where the other one was now, who said, I want to thank you. I've got one of those Next Generation scholarships, and it really made a difference for me, coming from a family that didn't have a lot, may not have been able to afford to send me to school. So it's certainly helping some number of Vermont kids obtain a college education, but